Satu, dua, tiga. Hello! Welcome to Gen Z Meets World podcast.
I am Aisha.
I'm Ahmed, and in a few more days, we will be celebrating the National Day or Hari Kebangsaan of Malaysia for this year. So, since we'll be celebrating that, we'll be talking about the National Day today.
On the National Day of Malaysia, it falls on the 31st of August 1957. And if we were to look, the National Day falls on the 31st of August,
yes.
but it commemorates what is called the Hari Kemerdekaan, which
Hari Merdeka.
Hari Merdeka, which was on the 31st of August 1957.
Yes.
So I remember whenever the National Day comes out, because it isn't just about like being excited for National Day, but it's also like the whole national month, because since the National Day is on the 31st August, the whole August is actually considered as the national month of Malaysia.
In fact, the celebration goes all the way till September.
Yes.
Yeah.
So whenever August comes up, I would always remember when we were younger. One of my earliest memories of celebrating the National Day is when our father would get us all to get ready very early in the morning.
Yes.
We need to have our breakfast super early, even though it's a holiday, so that we can catch the parade, the national
TV.
parade. Yeah.
Yes. And the entire celebration they have, the official government celebration,
which would be at the Merdeka Square. Or
most commonly.
Most commonly. It's also called Dataran Merdeka in
Malay.
So there would be the biggest part of the event for me when I was younger, would be this parade where they would have a lot of government officials and sometimes even school representatives who would march in the parade. The best part for me would be the police contingent, the police Diraja Melayu contingent, where they would they would be marching with their tanks and their their police cars and their horses and
motorcycles, all their vehicles,
and they would bring all their weapons, and they would usually they would also perform an act where they would reenact either them in action, or they would reenact
some historical scene.
A historical event or incident. Usually which kind of goes in alignment with National Day and national spirit. The tanks would be from the Regiment Askar Melayu contingent. Yes. They would bring the tanks. And that's also exciting.
My personal favorite would be at least when I was small. Actually, I always still feel excited about it now, even to this day. Would be when the Tentera Udara Diraja Malaysia, the Air Force, they will do an air performance with their fighter jets, and they will be flying, doing all sorts of tricks, all the aircraft tricks, and then with the smoke, the colored smoke coming out,
they would have red, blue and yellow and then the four white. So to commemorate the four colors of the Jalur Gemilang.
And the best part about it is how because it's most commonly held in at the Dataran Merdeka, they will first fly above our house. So from our house, we will be hearing and seeing the planes fly above us. The jets flying above us. And then after that, it will be on the TV. And we'll see it on location. So it's really fun because we really feel like you're there. You're part of the
an active participant of the event.
As if you're in one of the seats
at
the Merdeka Square. So that gives that sort of if you're watching a show, I call it breaking the fourth wall. I'm not sure if it will be in this case because it's not really.
It's sort of breaking the fourth wall.
Exactly. So it's that kind of feeling. So it really makes it even more
memorable. Immersive. Yes. Another part which we would often do and makes us feel like an active participant would be when they would I'm not sure how do you say that, cry out laungkan in Malay.
Yeah, I always don't know what that word is, but like, say out with full of spirit and declaring
Merdeka, they would say it.
Yeah.
And then after that they would play the national anthem. And we would, like, usually when the Prime Minister would say, like, Merdeka, everyone, the whole crowd would follow after. Merdeka! And then
it's to reenact,
commemorate,
what happened during the declaration, where the first Prime Minister will proclaim Merdeka, and everyone, all of the people in the the audience will follow after him. So that's what they're reenacting
and commemorating.
And
then after that they would play the national anthem, which is also what happened during the Declaration of Independence. And so we would also, when the Prime Minister says Merdeka, we will also cry after him. And then after that, when the national anthem comes out, we will also like stand up and sing.
Well, we were already standing up before that.
Yes, but like we would make sure that we're standing straight and we're like following after the national anthem. Yeah,
that was, I mean, sweet memories, but looking back, we still do it to this day. I mean, last year was a bit different because of the coronavirus, so the celebration was different. But then, we still do it to this day, celebrating it that way.
And what made it so strongly then, like when when the Prime Minister like cries out like Merdeka, and we would shout, cry out after him. It felt so strongly because like you're feeling and like just celebrating basically like how you are now Merdeka and independent, because like as how it was called, having Merdeka, so you're like celebrating like independence, like because how you're free.
Merdeka, for those who do not know, it means in this context it can be translated as independent or free. Basically it's like free from any grasp of anything, so it could mean independent from colonization and those kind of things.
But then eventually when we some years after that, I think it was around 2000, was it 12? About
at most, I think at most 10 years ago, so at most 2011, but it could be 2012 or 13. I don't think 2014.
I don't think so. I think 2013 we already knew it. Around that time, when we heard a statement by Professor Huki Kim, who said that
a historian,
a very
renowned
historian, incredible. So he said that basically what he said was that Tanah Melayu, which is like the Malayan states, was never colonized. Were never colonized, or in his own words, it was something like pihak British tak pernah menjajah Tanah Melayu, which was
the British never colonized the Malay States.
Which was very when that statement came out, it was like it was very controversial, and the reason why was because it made you it was like, so what is hari kemerdekaan? Like A is the question of, didn't the British
because that's what we've been taught since we were small.
That's what we've been learning, that's what we read anywhere. And then but just the main question then, because even if it isn't true, even if people have been teaching us wrong, then what's hari kemerdekaan? Because that exists. What about Tunku Abdul Rahman declaring like Merdeka? That exists, So it was very confusing initially. So I remember us, like, after we found out, we looked more into it. We asked historians and people like that, and we made like researches and we read into it, and then we found out where the misconception came about. We realized what is the misconception of like British colonizing Tanah Melayu, and B, we realized there was also another misconception
that also commonly occurred, which is I'll go one by one, which is starting from the timeline. We'll go with the second misconception first, which is that the Portuguese colonized the Sultanate, the Malay States. So the misconception came from go back to the history. Back in the
14th,
16,
15th, 14th,
14th.
a long
that,
time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. There was a kingdom called the Sultanate of Malacca, or the Kesultanan Melayu Malacca, which ruled the entire Malay Peninsula with quite a large part of Sumatra.
And some islands.
And many
around,
islands.
Around the streets.
Yeah, because there's like a
Malacca.
lot of islands. So with all the islands as well. So with it's ruling the entire place. But then to explain a bit, how the Sultanate works, they have like a central capital where the king rules, and that's like the administration.
It's like the capital.
Yeah, it's the capital. It's literally the capital.
Yeah, it's literally the capital.
So, and then the other regions are ruled by vassal states, which
ruled by vassals. They are vassal states.
They are vassal states under the Sultanate.
Yeah.
So when the Portuguese came, they wanted to utilize, because Malacca was a very important trade route, the Strait of Malacca, which was controlled by Malacca.
And specifically the capital, which was the Malacca City, was it called? It's called Kota Malacca in Malay and La Ville de Malacca in French. I don't know what it's called in English.
I mean, Kota will be translated as...
It's probably something like Malacca City. Or...
I mean...
City of Malacca, maybe.
Not city in the modern day sense,
yeah.
but a classic city, I would say, perhaps.
So like the main Malacca.
So that's the Malacca, yes.
Was like a very important trade, like hub. a very important hub.
So
and strategic.
Yes. So when the Portuguese came, they tried to colonize Malacca. It took them many years.
Yeah.
But when they finally managed to colonize the capital city, capture the capital city. The misconception is that once they captured the capital city, they captured the entire Malayan Peninsula with a lot of Sumatra and the many islands. When what actually happened was that they managed to capture the capital city, they built a fort, and they could not.
They basically replaced the castle, the palace, and the mosque and everything with their fort. Yeah.
So they replaced. They made their own things there, and they kind of just stayed there in the sense that they tried to advance forward, but
they couldn't.
They weren't able to move forward, because the thing about
what happened
was that when Malacca was attacked, aside from the central army from Malacca, they had a lot of armies from the vassal states.
Even if I'm not mistaken, the Ottomans.
Yes, the Ottomans.
And in fact,
they got a lot of allies.
Yep.
The Chinese, the Javanese. There were a lot of.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons why they were able to capture Malacca then, alongside there was some story about like some betrayal. There was also a lot of little things, like for example, a few states couldn't provide help. I think then the Ottomans was facing some problems, and they couldn't send as much help as usual.
And there were also like they caused civil war between the Javanese couldn't send an army because they were fighting. There were lots of stuff, little like things. So back to the point. So they captured the capital, but they can't advance forward because these vassal states kept attacking them, and they tried to reclaim the capital city. And actually, they were losing a lot of
what they initially managed to capture.
So, but they couldn't advance forward, which proves that not the entire place was colonized. It was literally just the capital city. Taking, for example, the United States. If you just take Washington D.C., you won't get Florida. It's very far away.
And in this case, because all of the vassal states had their own sovereign rulers, they had their own rulers, which were under the
umbrella
of Kesultanan, the Malaccan Sultanate. But after the Malaccan Sultanate fell, so they kept on reigning like their own autonomous sovereign ruler.
Well, they were autonomous, and now they're
like
own, actually their own country.
So and in fact, the Sultanate of Malacca, I can't remember if it was him himself, the last Sultan himself, or if it was his descendant who established the Sultanate of Johor,
Johor,
which was technically Johor was under Malacca previously, and they didn't have like the
a ruler over there. It was called Ujung Tanah back then.
Yes.
So they established
Kingdom.
a kingdom, Sultanate of Johor there, and the Sultanate of Johor just continued ruling to this day. We still have the Sultanate of Johor ruling sovereign, with no, colonial powers, colonial activity, I would say.
Yeah. So like that was like the misconception. Like they thought that the Portuguese, when the Portuguese captured the capital of Malacca, they thought that Portuguese
conquered the entire Malay land.
Yeah. So like there no longer is, like there was a break in the Malayan Sultanate rule, etc. So which is a misconception because they only captured Malacca.
Now, the main misconception that
is related to the whole Hari
Merdeka thing was that the British colonized the entire Malay land, which, well, it is a misconception. Yeah. That's why we call it a misconception. So, because what happened was that in this 18th century, the British came to...
The misconception is that the British came over and colonized the whole
peninsula.
And how the reason why it was said that way is that because each what do you call it, like sultanate, like at each state, each kingdom, yes, there was a British resident who acted as an advisor, and also thus subsequently also did a lot of things, like A, they like advised the Sultan to do certain stuff, and B,
implemented certain laws and taxes
and etc. So the misconception was that means that the British colonized the Malay States, and subsequently during the independence, the day of the independence, is us gaining independence from them, like no longer, like that's like the misconception.
So, what actually happened was that the British came and only took two small plots of lands, I would say. Like, they took an island from the Kedah Sultanate, and they took over the Malacca City. So, those are the only two. Oh, and also Singapore. From the Sultanate of Johor. But
that's like a separate story.
So they took these three states and called them the Strait Settlements under one colony. But the rest of the
Malayan
peninsula was left untouched.
Other than
the
installation
residents
of the residents.
So there was like a small union between four states called the Federated Malay States, but they still ruled on their own.
Like in the end, the sultans still had autonomous power,
and they were still higher power over the residents,
and they were still sovereign rulers, and thus that shows that the British did not colonize, because if the British colonized, then it would have meant that the British was the highest power, or like the Queen of England or King, or is the one with the highest sovereign rule, etc.
So much like if you take the Strait Settlements, they were completely under the British rule. Nobody else had any say except for the British rulers. So that really shows that it was never colonized. And then there was also aside from that obvious fact, we could also see through documentations where it's literally said so. As an example, I would take in 1924 there's this
court case
where a British company who did business in the state of Kelantan, one of the states which is in the Malay Peninsula. They came and did business, and they were not happy with the Sultan of Kelantan, the government of Kelantan,
the way that the government of Kelantan was like implementing
the state laws made by the government of Kelantan. So they weren't happy with it, so they bought they sued the government of Kelantan at the British court, and it's basically saying that they had no rights to implement those laws over them because they're like a British company. So Kelantan, being a British colony, should not have the rights to do that. And the court ruled that, first of all, the Kelantanese government is not a British colony, so there's no problem with the Kelantanese government imposing those laws. And second of all, because of Kelantan being an independent sovereign state, nothing to do with any British rule, they were. This case is not under
it's not valid.
It's not valid because it's void.
It's void, yes.
Because it is not under the jurisdiction of the British Empire, the British court. So they could not, make any rule over this, and so the case was just, cancelled.
Nulled, I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
Right there. So that really proved that there wasn't any colonization going on.
Like, you can see this, you can say that it only shows, like, proves that Kelantan was never colonized, but then you can see, like, the pattern, like, thus, like, if you can see that, then,
if like, that is so for this and everyone else as well.
I think these were the cases that were like, oh yeah,
it made us realize
when we learn about them. First, we asked, and then they said that it is true. Like, these people, these historians said, yes, it's true, we were never colonized. But then it's like, still, like, why, like, how, you're trying to see it. And even when we thought about how our sultans had independent sovereign rule, we couldn't, like, quite get it until we see these court cases. Then we were like, okay, yes, definitely they are independent. But it did bring to the question of, like, then what about the Declaration of Independence?
Because, it is called the Declaration of Independence.
So it's like, what is the independence? So, however, when we actually read into it and, in fact, like, consulted some
experts
on the matter, we realized that there were two paragraphs which, well, there were the whole thing is shed light, but two paragraphs which really prominently shed light onto the situation. And if we were to look at it, the Proclamation of Independence, the Proclamation of the Independence, which was declared during the Declaration of Independence, it says here, and to quote, and whereas by an agreement styled the Federation of Malaya Agreement 1957 between Her Majesty the Queen and Their Highnesses the rulers of the Malay States, it was agreed that the Malay States of Johor, Pahang, Negeri Sembilan, Selangor, Kedah, Perlis, Kelantan, Terengganu and Perak, and the former settlements of Malacca and Penang should, as from the 31st day of August 1957, be formed into a new federation of states by the name of Persekutuan Tanah Melayu. So, like, for me, in this paragraph, the two things that you can see is that you can see that Her Majesty the Queen of England recognizes the rights of the
recognizes the government.
Recognizes the government.
Legitimacy of the governments.
Yes. Of the rulers of the Malay States, because otherwise the Queen wouldn't be making a agreement with them. And also another thing which is, like, really prominent for me is that there is this distinguishment between the Malay States of Johor, Pahang, Negeri Sembilan, etc.
All the way to Perak.
And then there is the former settlements of Malacca and Penang. So that distinguishment between the two shows that there are these states and there are these former settlements.
Yes. And so these states were the ones that the Queen were dealing with, making the agreement with.
Which are independent.
These other states is the ones that the Queen is representing. So those are clearly the colonized states, the settlements, as they say.
Yeah.
Whereas the others were the sovereign states owned by the kings, owned by the rulers, by the Malay rulers.
Yeah. And then the paragraph after that, which is, like, super clear into it, says, and to quote, and whereas it was further agreed between the parties to the said agreement that the settlements of Malacca and Penang aforesaid should, as from the said date, cease to form part of Her Majesty's dominions and that Her Majesty should cease to exercise any sovereignty over them, which clearly states that only Malacca and Penang should need. It shows that only Malacca and Penang needs to be ceased to form part of Her Majesty's dominions.
In other words, it needs to gain independence.
Yeah. In other words, it shows that only these two states were part of Her Majesty's dominions. Thus, they were the only two states which were colonized.
So they were decolonized on that day, and the other states were never colonized, so they can't be decolonized if you're never colonized.
And like Her Majesty never had the rights to exercise any sovereignty over the other state. Yeah.
As a recap, first of all, Malacca, the Sultanate of Malacca was, only the capital of the Sultanate of Malacca was ever captured by the Portuguese, but the rest of the Sultanate managed to remain sovereign for years to come. And second of all, the British never colonized the entire Malay the entire Malay peninsula, but only held on to the colonies of Penang and Malacca, additionally Singapore for something else. And so,
but then I think I remember the question, we were already settled by then, but then there were sometimes some doubts or questions of then why didn't, because we all know that the installation of the residents kind of interfered with the ruling of the sultans, and did cause some problems and chaos, and there were some problems with it. And it's if the sultans had sovereign power, had sovereign rule, why didn't they just oust these advisors? Why did they accept to it, and etc. Which, if we were to look back into it, there might be, we haven't explored into each and every sultan, each and every state, and what happened everywhere. But then there was a trend in the states that we did look into. There was the trend of the need to, from the perspective of the sultan, there was the need for them to be diplomatic in handling these international foreign powers, because first of all, in international relations, you just need to be, I feel one thing that you can see, the whole nature of all of our rulers and sultan from the beginning, they have always been diplomacy first, war second. They had always, even if it's someone who they know might bring a threat, they would not just immediately strike war.
I mean, with the Portuguese, they did not go to war immediately. The Portuguese was the one who started the attacking, because they were it's just yet another European nation who wants to trade.
They're very diplomatic and open.
They allowed them to establish trading posts.
That's, I think, just the nature in the Malay rulers until now. But then that's one perspective. But then another is that even when it starts to become a threat, they couldn't immediately just simply oust or argue over it, because they had to be wary of how it may put, reacting in a wrong way may put the sovereignty in danger, may endanger the sovereignty,
and also endanger the people,
thus endangering
the people.
Because if you were to look at the history, the trend of how, it's not it doesn't happen everywhere, but there is a common trend of the British when they were going to colonize. If we were to take the Opium War, for example, first of all, they come over to trade, and then they believe that the Chinese, not saying who's right or wrong, just the perspective, they believe that the Chinese was not being free. It was not being as friendly to international trade, not being open to international trade, and so they were upset with it. They voiced their concerns and their upsetness, and then they started to criticize the things that the Chinese were doing. The Chinese was giving certain things, but then the British thought that it's not enough, and then there was this upset and dissatisfaction between both parties, until eventually, when there was so much what from the Chinese perspective, so much instigation from the British, so much disrespect, where they did things like there was like a lot of cases. You can look into it, but then like basically when the Chinese thought that the British is being too disrespectful and is already threatening their sovereignty, and it's like being too much in their own land, then they decided to strike a war. I can't remember who launched the first like cannon attack. I think it was the Chinese, but I can't remember exactly. But basically,
either way,
thus a war ensued, a war ensued, and then a war ensued, which is never a good thing. You would always want to avoid wars because it doesn't just affect your country in the sense of like financial and loss of human lives, but it also affects long term in the sense of like the trauma it causes on the people,
and how you would lose a lot of your belongings and infrastructure, so resources.
There's so many things over there that would happen because of war. So the fact that the war happened is already a sad thing, and then B, they lost. I can't remember exactly how did they properly end it to like be confident in talking about it, but then basically the Chinese lost and the British gained from the war, and thus like seeing that pattern, you would want to be the sultans of
the Malay States.
The Malay States were like trying to be careful to avoid the war, to avoid anything which might cause the war, and so like that's why they didn't just immediately oust them. And one of the things that I always love to look back in talking about this thing is there was this poem written by the advisor of the Sultan of Terengganu, Sultan Zainal Abidin III. His name was Datuk Seri Ahmadiraja Ngah Muhammad bin Yusuf, who is also our great grand uncle. Where he wrote a poem.
He later became the first chief minister of the
Terengganu. He wrote a poem where he advised the Sultan on being careful with diplomatic relationships with like the foreign powers, where you would want to be careful in the sense of like you would want to keep the diplomatic ties. You want to be you want to be friendly with them, to not just like make it difficult,
falsify, and those kind of things.
But at the same time, you need to hold on to your principles. You need to stand your ground. If there are things that you don't agree with, you don't agree with them, and etc. Specifically in the poem, he was referring to the Siam, the Siamese rulers, and also the British powers. So that poem for me like definitely proves that was the perspective back then. Like they were trying to be careful because they know that it isn't just about losing the sovereign power. It's also about the welfare of the people. Because I mean the fact that just by having advisors, the people were already burdened with so much taxes and were losing so much possessions and etc. They know that if the British
had complete power, then
it will be far
because
worse.
There were a lot of things that the British wanted to implement, but the rulers really strictly said no, which in some places did actually cause a bit of a conflict. But because they did not want to do these certain things because those would cause a bigger problem. So if the British had complete power, then those things and many more other things would be implemented.
I guess you can see it, for an example, you can see in in India, the effect of like the British rule. That was like a very clear example how a lot of them were first of all the whole disrespect for the local culture and heritage, but then second of all the whole like well-being of the people, how the people were like not like their local industries couldn't thrive. There were lots of people who were being forced to go to war for the British. Like becoming soldiers.
Some of them even came here, brought by the British. Brought by the British to become like labourers and even like soldiers, part of the British army. a lot of it were taken from India.
So like all of that kind of like comes to show like how the rulers needed to be very careful
with these,
and thus that's why they couldn't just simply oust the residents. But in the end, I mean, the whole reason why they need to be diplomatic with it was because they want to protect the well-being and the welfare of the people. And then they were like, even if you don't see it, they were slowly trying to get rid of the British power. And in the end, with the help of the Malay rulers, like the ones who were not the Sultan, the Malay rulers, leaders, I'd say, and also the many people, that was what happened during the Hari Merdeka or Independence Day. It was an independence for the settlements, but it's also like basically to be free
from these
interference from the foreign
because
powers.
There was still interference, just not direct colonization. So because going back to the etymology or like definition of the word Merdeka, it just means to be free. From in Malay it's called cengkaman. I can't
grasp.
The grasp of anything that is not us. So in this case, foreign powers.
It's not necessarily to be free from a dependency.
It's just that before this you're kind of like restricted
and trapped.
So now you could move freely. You could
So it's simply that is like what like the independence was about. And after learning all that, for me personally, it felt a lot more meaningful.
Yes.
Like there was a moment when you were like confused because, and you're like, so what?
It's kind
so
of like,
what have you been celebrating all this while?
And like you kind of like feeling as if you don't know the purpose of it anymore.
And it's like, so why would you celebrate it? But then after learning about it, for me, it felt a lot more stronger. It not only celebrates like a lot stronger. Not only it celebrates the victory of the people to like gain independence for like the settlements, but like it also shows like how it celebrates, for me, you're celebrating how we were able to go through all of that without being captured or colonized in the first place. There are lots of places where they celebrate the independence, where they were able to reclaim their land, which is cool. Which is so cool. But like in our case, it's like the victory is that we managed to avoid war and avoid being colonized. Like,
so it's not like
we didn't just avoid being colonized. We avoided war in the first place.
So it's not like
there were small battles,
and
but
it's not like we avoid war and we just let them colonize us. We didn't just stay there. Come on, just get in and we'll get you out later. So that was that I would say navigating through that kind of rough waters is actually, in a way, because war is tough. You have to strategize and all that. But then in this case, this was very hard to pull off, because you need to make sure that you do not trigger that.
Instigate.
Like
give the excuse to the foreign powers to strike that war and capture. In this around this matter, there is this quote that I always love from Tan Sri Omar Muhammad Hashim, who is a big figure, like a very important figure in our country. He said that people often forget that the war with, I can't remember exactly, but then it was something like the war with like words and your pen and like that kind of like diplomatic war is a lot harder to navigate compared to like war with weapons and etc. That you forget, because like it doesn't sound as dramatic. So you forget, it doesn't sound as dramatic and romantic, so you forget about how the value of it and how much it saves you, like in the first place. So I think since then, because like by the time we learned about it, we were like older, I feel like it gave us a realization of like the importance to know what you celebrate, the importance to understand what you celebrate, the importance to know what you're doing in the first place. And thus, I feel like after that, the celebration of the National Day for us became not just like singing and watching the parade and waving our flags, but it's also like we would try to commemorate the month with trying to read further into
understanding more about our country, about the history in general, like even before the countries formed, the history of our nation.
Our
as
people,
a whole,
as our heritage, our tradition, like why our culture is so and so, where does it come from? And we will also like try to use a lot more of our native language, like speak it more often and write it more often. And we will also try to use our Jawi script, which is our original script.
Malay script.
So we would like try to commemorate it in a way which feels a lot more, how do you say that? I feel like we would say wholesome, you know, like for us, like it, because you start to reflect on, so what is the purpose of like a celebration? And so you start to think about like, okay, so how can you celebrate to actually, you are celebrating to commemorate something. How do you want to commemorate it? Do you just want to make it a remembrance day? Or do you actually want to learn about it and commemorate it by understanding and appreciating?
Because, if you just, remember...
What do you remember?
What do you remember? You need to understand before you could remember.
I think to avoid that this confusion of like the whole Merdeka and independence, etc., that was the reason why our government changed the day.
The name of the day.
Instead of like...
The holiday,
It was previously called Hari Merdeka or Independence Day, and then it's now changed to... it was Hari Merdeka or Merdeka Day.
Oh, Merdeka Day, yes.
And then it's now changed to National Day or Hari Kebangsaan.
So, not... The 31st August 1957 is still called Hari Merdeka or Merdeka Day, but the celebration
is called
in the following years is now called the National Day.
And I think that goes to like how we celebrate now, where we would like try to remember and understand more, which always reminds me, I feel like one of the strongest memories for me, the one of the events, one of the things that happened in my life, which really made me understand and appreciate it, because like it is true that we didn't go through war, but there was still like proper war with like the British, but we still faced a lot of really difficult and impactful moments, tragic events. Like there were like little small battles, not like small in the sense of like magnitude, but like small in the sense of like it didn't impact a whole large area.
Military conflicts, basically.
So there were those. But then there were also moments, like for example during the Japanese occupation, and after the Japanese
then the communist insurgency.
The communist insurgency, which specifically the communist insurgency, I would remember. There's like so many stories from like our ancestors. They all talk about them, and like you do understand it, and you do like feel it, and like talk about like it was very hard. You couldn't get much food and etc. But eventually there was that one moment when our grandfather, who we mentioned in our previous episode, who was as he grew older, his memory started to deteriorate a bit.
He could wake, and he could also like wake up in whatever timeline from his
previous his past. So there were moments when he wake up and there are moments when he wake up in a certain timeline, at a certain timeline of his life, and B, there are certain times when he wakes up and he speaks in a foreign language which we couldn't understand. He won't talk in any other language but foreign language.
He knew a lot of foreign languages because he used to study in the Middle East and Europe.
But specifically there was this one day when he woke up and he thought that he was living during the communist insurgency. And he was like trying to tell we were like normal life. We were laughing and we were talking and like at this volume, and then he like told us to quiet down because he's like, the people can hear us, and we're like, who? And he's like, the communists. We're like, oh. And then like we figured out that we're living in that
we're
timeline
living
now.
in something now.
But then like we're like, oh, like we're like trying to like, okay, we're trying to like make it easy for him. So we're like, okay, we'll start to be quiet. We're trying to be accommodating. But then eventually it got like, because sometimes he would like forget after a while, or like he'll have a nap and he'll wake up differently.
Generally it will be after sleep.
Yeah, but that day he was like really into it, and he was like, because the thing is that he's really what do you call that? Yeah, anxious. He got very anxious, and he was also being very proactive in that trying to help us and save us. He was going all around the house looking for like traps and
checking for things under the chair, checking for
and he was like, he wouldn't eat because he's like, we need to ration, there's too much food, we can't have it. Like he doesn't need to have that food because he's healthy, he's fine. He doesn't need to have that food. Give it to other people who need it. Give it to the sick people. Give it to the people who need the food. A. And B, this is too much food for you to have in one serving. You need to ration food. You need to be careful with the amount that you're eating, because there's like very
in case we run
trying
out of food.
times.
Yeah.
So and he was also like trying to like protect certain people. Like for example, I remember one of the times when that happened, he assumed that Ahmad was a Malay leader from back then, Ibrahim Fikri. And he was like saying like, this Ibrahim Fikri, we need to take care of him, we need to defend him, we need to protect him from like harm. And like he won't like when we gave him food, he would give his food to Ahmad, because it's like Ibrahim Fikri first, because like for him it's like the leader is not just about saving the leader because he's the leader, but it's because it's the leader who would lead the people to.
So if the people do not have a leader, then the people will be in chaos
and disarray. So you need a leader, you need the leader to lead the people and unite the people. So it was like the effect of that was like, because when you watch him being so anxious, and when you watch him being
caring so much about making sure that things are going right for the country,
and when you watch him
for the other people in the
house, and like how anxious he is, and how it's like if you were to watch a film, and it's like like let's say a historical film where like you see all these people who are so worried and like hiding in the houses, but in this case it's like it's not acted. Because he really is living there.
He wakes up in thinking
it really is the thing that's happening. So like he really is anxious, he's very concerned, and he like watching it actually happening in your from your eyes, it's like time traveling.
Yeah.
And it was very right then, we were very worried, because we were like
we were mostly worried of his health, because he's 90.
And his heart was like so fast, because he was like being so anxious. But he's healthy, so it's cool.
Fortunately, he had no health complications at all. So
it's specifically heart problems. So he was being very worried about everything, which made us worried, and like trying to calm him down. He won't calm down, because aren't you getting it? We're in danger. So, but then definitely for us, that was, for me, that was a very, and I'm confident for you, that was a very
big eye opener.
Yeah, like we have always from our perspective, we always felt like we have always understood the gravity, the weight of that moment, how trying it was, how hard it was when we were attacked, and when our sovereign powers was tested, and like even if we never lost our rulers never lost their sovereignty, these moments still impacted our people. There was still a lot of like trying times and difficult days and etc. And watching our grandfather really made me like appreciate their sacrifice at a much deeper level. Because to be honest, a lot of these, I'm not saying like all of them, but a lot of them were like willing to like, okay, give up your power, like etc. So our leaders could have done that, but because they know how much our people were suffering, and how badly it would affect the people's well-being and welfare, they went through all of this to like not just the rulers, definitely the rulers, but not just the rulers, even like our leaders whose life was threatened, which we know again from the story of our grandfather. And then even the many people, the people in general, were standing their ground. Like one of the stories that also affects me a lot when around this topic is the book by I can't remember the name of the author. It was something Talib
Abdul Latif
bin Talib. There was a Talib or a Latif somewhere.
Latif was it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so but basically the book Lieutenant Adnan. So that
fortunately I finished my exam. Don't need to remember his name anymore.
So that book, we learned about it because it was in our SPM syllabus. But I am thankful that it was in the syllabus because
we managed to read that book.
Yeah, because I might not have read it, but that book because that book talks about like the people, because we've always known like sort of like the rulers, because like that's the stories from our family, usually like the rulers or the leaders coming from like stories of Dato Amma or our grandfather, who was actually kind of like, he wasn't a leader back then, but he knew leaders. He was helping, like how he was saving Ibrahim Fikri. So we know all these stories, but then we didn't know as much about the people in general because our father wasn't alive. Like our father was born in 1958, so he didn't experience it. And our grandfather, as we said, like that's the story of our grandfather. And we never managed to ask our grandfather from the other side, from our father's side, because he passed away before we were born. So we never had like a very in-depth story from like the people in general,
the people's perspective.
So reading these books were like really nice,
because you see how each and every individual person from the society, they also tried as hard
as they could for the nation, for the people,
despite through the hardest of times during the Japanese occupation, during the World War. They still played a role trying to
because every little thing helps. Like I did in fact the person I mentioned, Tan Sri Omar Hashim, I read his autobiography, which also like talked a lot from like his perspective, and he went through a lot of these. I think he talked a lot about like the Japanese occupation and I think he mentioned, I can't remember about the communist insurgency, but he mentioned a lot about like during the Japanese occupation. So reading all of these stories like really give you a deeper understanding and appreciation, and makes you celebrate the National Day with a lot more spirit and emotion and appreciation for like all of our ancestors. So like coming from that, it will be very interesting to hear like what you know of your family, your parents, your uncles, your aunts, your grandfather, your great granduncle, or etc. When what they went through during all these moments. In fact, even during the 13th May incident, like that was also a very strong incident which tested the well-being of our country. So even like stories from that moment was like very nice to hear. It didn't affect our parents much because they were like living in the East Coast. It didn't affect them much, but we did hear some from like our friend
from
who lived
in the Kuala
so it will be very interesting to hear like what you know of like the stories of your parents or your grandparents, or even your friends, or even just random people who like how I read Tan Sri Omar Hashim's autobiography, and like even like what the National Day means to you, and how you commemorate it, how you celebrate it, and how
wherever
you
come from. Because first of all, there's like different countries will celebrate it differently because of the different cultures, and second of all, even the same country, in the same society, in the same community, you will celebrate it differently based on your way. So it will be interesting to hear how you celebrate it, how and if you agree with how we celebrate it, and what you feel is the best way to celebrate the National Day of any country. Just
like to see like all the many perspectives, that would be very interesting. And I think it's always important for you to just celebrate, like to feel that national spirit. It brings a lot of advantages. I feel like we can talk about that further one day, perhaps, like about patriotism and national spirit in general. But so thanks so much for listening and watching, and do join in the conversation by commenting
or leaving a voice message.
And if you like the video, you can like it, and also like follow us so that you can watch more and join more conversations, because we will be very excited to have you participating in our conversation.
So and before we go, Selamat Hari Kebangsaan.